G'day good people, are you ready to see the finalised top 10 performance sailing catamarans out there? Now this list is going to include the Odyssey 48, which is the boat I'm involved in designing at the moment. I've got so many emails and comments saying, where's the Odyssey 48? So that's in it, so you can compare. Now this is based upon facts and figures, okay? Boat builders tend to muddy the waters with the reported values. I've unmodified the waters, so basically we can compare catamaran to catamaran, apples with apples. Look, let's just get straight into it. The first thing is sail area to displacement. This is a bit like horsepower to the chassis of your car. The bigger the horsepower and the lighter the chassis, the better performing car you have. Well, in boat terms, the bigger sail area to the lighter the body, the better performing catamaran you have. Let's take a look. The horizontal axis is waterline length in feet, and the actual sail area to displacement ratio is the vertical axis. Basically, the higher you go up, the more of a performance catamaran it is. Let's segregate the performance cats. The top three being very close together are the ORC 50, the Dazcat 1495, and the Odyssey 48, a very close third, which is the boat that I am involved in designing. Followed by the Balance 526, Catana OC, the Outremer, Balance 482, Seawind 1600, and last, HH50. Now let me show you how much tweaking I had to do with all of these numbers. I wrote to a lot of the boat builders, only some of them got back to me, so I'm not entirely sure on the bottom lot, but the top 10 I'm pretty sure. Do you remember when you're looking at sail area in the sail area to displacement ratio, you're looking at the 100% four-peak triangular area, not a Genoa, not a 115, not a 150, and not a self-tacking jib. And so boat builders tend to muddy the waters and they can overstate their sail area. And so I've had to tweak them back. Some of them I even had to tweak up because they were just using the self-tacking jib. But I'll show you this now. ORC 50 drops a bit because it has figures based on a Genoa. It's no big deal, still number one. Next, the Bali 4.8 drops off a cliff somewhere down there. Surprisingly, we have to raise the values of the Outremer because they have self-jacking jibs, which are smaller than 100% jibs, and they have included this smaller area in their calculations. XS and Leopard drop, and the HH50 and OC50 rise a bit for the same reason as the Outremer. The HH44 is quoted as having almost 29 on the graph, while its bigger sister, the HH50, was quoted as being 23.83. This is really suspicious. Its quoted sail area is actually greater than the bigger sister, the HH50. Now, the HH44 is 2 metres smaller and the mast is 4 metres shorter, and yet the sail area is bigger? Sounds like the laws of maths and physics have gone out the window. So I wrote them another email and I got the sail plan, and here it is. If we take a look at the bottom left-hand corner, we can see something called an overlapping solent. Now a solent is a 100% jib, and the reason why they call it a solent is because it's named after a windy area between Great Britain and the Isle of Wight, the Solent. And they prefer not to use Genoas, they prefer to use the smaller 100% jib. Hence it's called the solent. Now I don't know, I've never heard of the term overlapping solent. I don't know why you just don't call it a Genoa. If we add up all the sail areas, we get 125.29, which corresponds to the sail area on sailboatdata.com to 1 decimal place. It's interesting to note that in the additional notes, the term overlapping has been left out. If you were looking at these numbers in good faith, you'd actually get a higher sail area to displacement ratio. It's certainly not 28.73. I mean, overlapping solent, Genoa, I've put it back to 100% four-peak triangular area, and this is what it is. This is a big difference from what they originally claimed up here. I asked James from Sailing Zingaro from that previous podcast, why would they do this?
To sell them.
Smokes and mirrors, people.
It doesn't matter afterwards. Like, oh, guys, look, no one's going to even say anything.
Yeah, there was a 7, right? And
no one's even going to say anything. They all bought the boat. They're not going to say like, hey, by the way, yeah, I'm going to devalue my boat right now by coming out to everyone that it really doesn't have the sail area that you tell them it did.
So just to recap, after all that tweaking, I'm very surprised to see the HH44 where it is, especially after all the media hype about it. I'm also surprised to see the Seawind 1370 where it is. Again, all the media hype on YouTube. And also, well, OC50, less surprise. I mean, it's the poorer cousin of the HH50, but it's, well, let's go into the construction later, but it's got some issues. But let's just look at the numbers. I mean, the numbers speak for themselves. Incidentally, I am open to any form of debate with any other YouTube channel on what constitutes a performance catamaran. We can go through numbers, we can go through weight, sail area, we can do it all. I think everyone would learn a lot. Displacement to waterline length is how much weight is carried by the hulls. The horizontal axis is the waterline length in feet, and the vertical axis is the displacement to waterline length ratio. We are trying to get the lowest number for better performance. But there is a limit to how light you can go. I mean, after all, we are trying to sail around the world. That's going to take quite a bit of punishment. The boat needs to be strong enough. I mean, we're not talking about a day sailor that's going around the markers that picks up the Saturday afternoon trophy. And that's why I decided to build my boat out of aluminium, because it's light, it's strong, and it's durable. Now, believe it or not, if you got a room full of boat builders, designers, racers, cruisers of many years, people have owned a number of boats, you put them all in the one room and you ask them what their most ideal boat building material is, the significant majority would say aluminium. There's a reason why Jimmy Cornell, Steve Dashu, and a whole heap of other famous sailors have aluminium boats. It's because it is light, it's strong, and it's durable. When we talk about light and strong, aluminium's shear strength alone is more than 4 times that of GRP. That's a significant difference. And that's why you can have aluminium boats that are half the weight or a third of the weight of the equivalent GRP boat, and it still be stronger than that GRP boat. That is a tremendous weight saving. Also, aluminium's more durable. If you hit an obstacle in the water, it'll either bounce off or it'll dent it. With fiberglass, you're more than likely you're going to get a hole. Even carbon fiber. Yes, carbon fiber is stronger than aluminium, but it's not very good under point load. It will shatter and you will get a hole. And that's a hole in your boat. Trust me, I've been there. You don't want that. And a very expensive repair. Now, you're probably saying, well, why aren't there more aluminium boats? Well, it doesn't lend itself well to mass production. It's much easier to make a bunch of molds, because all the catamarans now have a bunch of molds and then they stitch them together. And you simply make individual parts of the boat, pop them out of the mold, only takes a few days, stitch them together, and you get a boat very quickly. The molds, yes, are very expensive at the start, but mass producing the boat, it's a much easier way to do it that way. Aluminium, you have to cut out the buggers. You have to cut out the bulkheads, the stringers, create a frame, bend the aluminium, and then weld it, and then make sure when you weld it, welding's an issue with aluminium as it is, because you can't weld too much because you'll distort the frame. You've got to follow a certain process. It is a difficult job, and if people want to make money, boat builders want to make money, they want the easier solution, and that's why you have GRP boats. Let's get back to the graph. As you can see, the Dazcat comes in at number 1. Next is the Odyssey 48, the boat I'm helping to design, and then the ORC 50, followed by Outremer 45, then the 51, the Balance 526, the Seawind 1600, HH 50, Balance 482, and finally the Slyder 49. Yes, and people, I am surprised again with the HH44 and the Seawind 1370 and the OC50. They're breaking the cardinal rule for performance cats. Cats need to be light. The last ratio to be found on sailboatdata.com is KSP, which is the Kelsall Sailing Performance Number. And yes, here again I have brought the boat builders' numbers back to the real world. KSP gives you a guide of how fast the boat will go in 10 knots. So for example, with the Odyssey 48, its speed according to KSP would be 10 times 0.95, which is 9.5 knots. I don't hold too much faith in this ratio. Let me explain. Odyssey's weight is 7,700 kilograms compared with, say, the Leopard 50 at 20,600 kilograms. That is almost 3 times the weight of the Odyssey. You would need much more than 10 knots to get that Leopard to 6.4 knots. There are other issues I have with this ratio, but at best, it's an indication of performance. Obviously, the greater the value, the more performance is expected. Let's again separate the performance catamarans, and we see Dazcat is number 1, ORC 50 number 2, followed very closely by the Odyssey 48. And then we have the Balance 526, the Outremer's, Catana OC, Seawind 1600, Balance 482, and the Privilege 495. I suspect Privilege 495 is not really at number 10, but is much further down the list. But I was missing further information to correct their reported value. And surprise, surprise, the HH44, the Seawind 1370, and the OC50 are way down the list again. Now, I ought to point out that most of the boats you see in these graphs are made from polyester resin and Eglass. Let's have a look at polyester resin first. It was invented in 1847. That's almost 200 years ago. And the process of putting fibre in the glass, I think it was 1933, that's almost 100 years ago. Why do they use polyester resin? Because it's cheap. It is arguably in the shape of a monohull, because a monohull's shape is inherently strong. I mean, there's not too many angles, you know, it's nice uniform shape. And you can sort of get away with it. I agree with that. But catamarans are not like that. There's lots of angles, 90-degree angles. Yes, they have radiuses to, you know, decrease the stress concentrations, but still you're going from here to here between the bridge deck and the hull. You get flexing, you get the hulls walking at different angles because different waves, you know, are affecting them. In my mind, if you're going to be spending upwards of $1 million or $1.5 million on a boat, they ought not to be using polyester resin. Why? Because polyester resin is too brittle and not up to the demands of catamarans. Let me explain. In diagram 1, we have glass fibre encapsulated in polyester resin. In diagram 2, we have glass fibre encapsulated in vinyl ester or epoxy resin. Now let's apply a tensile force to both slabs. What happens? Well, they both stretch a bit and there is no real problem. But now let's apply more tensile force. What happens? The polyester resin has started to get cracks in it, where the vinyl ester and epoxy slab is still fine. Why? Because polyester resin's stretch to failure is only about 1%. This means that about only 20% of the fibre strength in polyester resin is ever being used before the resin matrix starts to crack up. In diagram 2, since the fibres and the resin have similar stretch to failure, they continually protect each other as the stress increases, creating a much stronger and more durable fiberglass. Diagram 1 seems to me resembles a necklace with all the strength of a necklace. It's not ideal for catamarans. At the very least, vinyl ester, and some of these boat manufacturers, I think Balance, or especially the most expensive Balance catamaran, are using totally epoxy resins. A lot of them will say, and this is in their constructions, oh, epoxy infused, carbon reinforced, this, and this, and this, and this. But then later on in the documentation, they'll say, oh, and we have a barrier coat of vinyl ester resin. Why do they have a barrier coat of vinyl ester resin? You don't need a barrier coat on vinyl ester resin. You don't need a barrier coat on epoxy, even though they're screaming to the world that it's epoxy infused carbon reinforced boat. Well, the truth of the matter is you need vinyl ester as a barrier coat on polyester resin. So when you see that, that's code for there's polyester in the hulls. And what happens is, because polyester resin, well, a lot of people think it's water impermeable, but it's not, and you get osmosis and blisters and that sort of stuff. And so to get around that, they put a vinyl ester barrier coat. So yes, they muddy the waters. Look, you've got an expensive boat, just insist on the best. They're actually saying Eglass as if this is a marketing tool, as in, oh, this is great. Eglass is the cheapest and nastiest of the glass. I'd also be insisting not only be vinyl ester, but S2 glass, which is significantly stronger than E-glass. It's greater in tensile strength, greater in stiffness, greater elastic modulus. It's a far superior glass. Yes, it's more expensive, and yes, vinyl ester is more expensive, and that's why they're not using it. But as I said, if you're buying a boat that's close to $1 million or $1.5 million, why skimp there? You want the best materials for your home. S2 glass is more than 35% greater in tensile strength, about a quarter greater in elasticity, and about 10% greater in deformation before failure. I've placed in a baseline price from the best valued catamarans, the Odyssey 48, and the market leader, the Outremer 45, a French company building their boats in expensive France, which ought to open your eyes. Let's have a look at all the cats in reference to this line. When I first saw this graph, people, I was shocked. Are you guys shocked? I still am shocked. I mean, HH, it's built in China, and yet the boat, the HH50, is what, 3 times the baseline price? It doesn't make sense to me. I thought things made in China were cheaper. And when we look at HH44, we looked at all their numbers and none of them were crash hot at all. In fact, they were all in the dark. Is the price justified? I don't know. I'm just presenting the facts, people. The reality is there are a lot of very expensive boats out there. Just make sure you do your research and buy a boat that deserves its price. In summary, we have the super slick Dazcat 1495 in position 1 at $1.7 million. Next, we have the bare bones racer ORC 50 at almost $1.2 million. The Odyssey 48 comes in at a solid 3rd place, which we're very happy about. John Citizen should also be happy when he looks at the price, with it being the best valued cat out there. Balance 526 solidly at position 4, and the Outremers 2 at position 5 and 6. Next, Seawind 1600, Catana OC, Balance 482, and finally HH50, with the runners-up Windelo 50 and Slyder 49. No doubt you're watching this to educate yourself because you're interested in buying a boat. Understood. I will say, after going through all the documentation and emailing builders and looking at how they muddy the waters, I would say caveat emptor, buyer beware. Look, if you're unsure, put it in the contract. I mean, it'd be a shame if you contract for a 9-ton boat and it came out as 10.5-ton boat. I mean, it's not what you wanted. Also, sail area, and don't put them in as warranties in the contract. Put them in as conditions, so it's essential to you. Because you can do that. You are buying this boat. You can stipulate what you like. And if they're not willing to back it up by putting it in the contract, well, that's suspicious in itself. But I was amazed about what's reported and the documentation and how they muddy the waters. Anyway, look, if you do want any more information on the Odyssey 48, you can contact me by email at peter@olcanoworldchallenge.org, and I'll send off some information to you. But buying a boat, I wish you good luck. How do we find these ratios? Simply go to sailboatdata.com and type in the boat you wish to analyse. You'll get something that looks like this. In the case of the HH44, we have the ratios both here and here. Of course, if the boat you're looking at is not in sailboatdata.com, you can calculate the ratios yourself using the formulas here. Just make sure you use the units as prescribed. Please be aware that figures such as lightship displacement and sail area can be under and overquoted respectively. So email the boat builders and get them to send you some documentation.